And sorry to stop you, from continuing with your break. This is panel 6 on Ismaili philosophy, and we have 3 speakers. Each will have 20 minutes and then 10 minutes for questions and answers. And regrettably, 2 of our colleagues are not present with us. Only we have here Professor Daniel de Smet, and they will join us via Zoom. And we start now with the presentation of Professor Daniel de Smet that carries the title The Evaporation of Matter, a mysterious Syrian Nizari text attributed to the Fatimid Caliph al-Mu'izz.
Thank you. So, in the year 1809, the Nusayris took the fortress of Masyaf, one of the main centers of the Nizari Ismaili community in Syria, and they robbed all they could find inside. A few years later, Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, the general consul of France in Aleppo, purchased an anonymous Arabic manuscript without title, which belonged to the looted library of Masyaf. When the famous Arabist Antoine Isaac Sylvestre de Sacy, the father of modern Arabic and Islamic studies, heard about the manuscript from his former student Rousseau, he could hardly master his excitement. Indeed, with the exception of the sacred writings of the Druze, the scarce information on Ismailism available at the beginning of the 19th century was provided by Egyptian Mamluk historians, in particular El-Makrizi and El-Nuwairi, who had access to Fatimid chronicles now lost, but also used in a very uncritical way some anti-Ismaili polemical writings. Now, for the first time, an authentic, genuine Ismaili manuscript had been discovered. But when Rousseau informed him about its contents, de Sacy's enthusiasm turned into a profound disappointment. It was clear for de Sacy that the doctrine exposed in the manuscript had nothing to do with what he considered to be the pure Ismailism of the Fatimids, but that it was only a late, deficient version of it, corrupted by Nusayri heresies, such as the transmigration of souls and the deification of the imams. Rousseau and his master de Sacy thus were at the origin of a theory considering Syrian Nizarism as the result of an Ismaili Nusayri syncretism, a theory which is still accepted by some scholars today, although it lacks any foundation, as I showed in a recent contribution to the Festschrift for Christian Jambet, edited by Mohamed Ali Amir Moisi. The manuscript was finally sent to the Société Asiatique in Paris and later to the Bibliothèque Nationale, where it is still kept today. In 1874, Stanislas Guillard published the Arabic text with a French translation and commentary in his Fragment relatif à la doctrine des Ismaélis. Although it was the first Ismaili text made accessible to Western scholars, and although it concerned the doctrines of the Nizaris, well known at that time as the terrible sect of the assassins, and although it includes many quotes taken from alleged sermons of Rashid Eddin Sinan, the old man of the mountains, the Sheikh el-Jabal, about whom so much had been written since the Middle Ages, Guyar's publication received very little attention. In fact, I am not aware of any study of its contents besides some occasional references here and there. When in the 20th century more and more Ismaili texts were printed, mainly based on Arabic manuscripts kept in the Tayyibi libraries in India, Guyar's fragments were finally disqualified, even by authoritative scholars such as Wilfert Madelung and Heinz Halm, as strange, syncretic, corrupted, and unreliable texts of a very limited interest. Many of these fragments are indeed strange, and it is precisely this strangeness which makes them interesting. I will illustrate this today by focusing on the fourth fragment, which is introduced by the sentence "Qala al-Imam al-Mu'is fi din Allah, Amir al-Mu'minin." Al-Mu'is, of course, was the fourth Fatimid Caliph. The text takes the form of a lesson, a majlis, perhaps read in one of the majalis al-Hikmah, in which the Imam or his representative explained the esoteric doctrine of Ismailism to a selected public of initiates. The subject of the lesson is Fana al-Alam, the extinction of the world. The author starts with the statement that the world has a beginning and an end, ibtida wa intiha, and hence is not eternal. The whole universe proceeds from the Creator, the Mubdi, who generated the intellect. From the intellect emanate successively the soul and matter. The soul is two-faced. One face is attracted upwards by the intellect, the other is attracted downwards by matter. Through its lower face, soul desires matter so that it finally got mixed with it. The individual souls of plants, animals, and men are parts of the universal soul imprisoned in material bodies. They need salvation and purification in order to return to the soul, their original homeland. All this is not quite original. The text describes the classical Neoplatonic emanation scheme, well known from Islamic Neoplatonism in general and Ismaili Neoplatonism in particular. Although this worldview is very common in 10th century Ismailism, mainly in the Eastern Da'wah, it is doubtful whether al-Mu'is adopted such a cosmological doctrine. In any case, it is absent from al-Mu'is' sermons transmitted by his contemporary, the Qadi an-Nu'man. In the latter's Kitab al-Majalis wal-Musayyarat, there is even a passage in which the Imam al-Mu'is condemns some da'is in the East who are mixing religion with philosophy. This makes the attribution of our text to al-Mu'is rather doubtful. Where our text becomes strange and thus interesting is when the author claims that our material world is gradually decreasing. In ancient times, he states, the different people in the world had much taller bodies than we have today, and they lived quite longer. This is proved by the fact that human bones have been discovered, which are more than 2 times longer than our bones. In the course of time, the size of man decreases. Every 1,000 years, the human species is losing a part of its tallness. At the same time, the world population decreases constantly, so that there are fewer and fewer people on Earth. At a given moment, we will no longer be able to generate well-formed children, and procreation will become impossible. This is the extinction of mankind, Fana al-Khalq. The reason for this extinction of mankind is that matter, necessary for the formation of bodies, becomes scarcer and scarcer. Matter on Earth is evaporating. In the same way as the size of human bodies decreases, the surface of the Earth becomes smaller and smaller. In the course of time, the circumference of the Earth is successively halved, so that finally there will remain no trace left of it. This is the extinction of the world, Fana el-Alam. The most remarkable aspect of the whole story is the ultimate reason given by the author for this extinction of the world. Matter returns to the soul. El-Mada yarja ila nafs. This is, of course, a surprising and interesting statement. In mainstream Neoplatonism, at least as it is understood in the Muslim world, matter and the individual souls proceed by emanation from the universal soul. The individual souls, after purification from their mixture with matter, return to the universal soul. But here, the return, the ma'at, epistrophe in Greek, is complete. Along with the souls, matter also returns to its source, the universal soul. Although it is not explicitly said in our text, we can suppose that matter returns after it has in turn been purified. As far as I know, the idea of the redemption of nature and matter only occurs in an Ismaili context in the cosmological system of the Tayyibis, as it was developed for the first time by Ibrahim el-Hamidi in his book Kans el-Walad, written in Yemen in the 12th century. Here also the material world is the result of the fall of the soul, in this case the third intellect, followed by the generation of matter and the mixing of parts of the soul with it. With the help of the stars and planets, the demiurge, the third intellect, which became the 10th after its fall, tries to purify the material world by attracting through the column of light, the Amud en-Nur, all the parcels of light separated from darkness. Not only the souls are purified in this way, matter itself is by a kind of alchemical process whitened and transformed as much as possible into a diaphanous substance. After a vertiginous long time of billions of years, with a constant absorption of purified matter by divine magnetism, el-magnatis el-ilahi, the material universe will finally disappear. Only those parts of matter which have resisted to every form of sublimation will be coagulated into a compact mass identified with the Quranic rock of Sijin. It seems likely to me that the Fana el-Alam, as described in Guyar's fourth fragment, with matter returning to soul, is somehow linked with the Tayyibi idea of the sublimation of the material universe. Although the attribution of the text to El-Mu'is is more than doubtful, as we have seen, there are no elements in it that are specific for Nizari or Tayyibi doctrine, so that it possibly antedates them. The terminology is indeed that of classical 10th and 11th century Fatimid Neoplatonism. The text occurs in a Syrian Nizari manuscript, the Nizaris forming with the Tayyibis the two main branches of Ismailism after the fall of the Fatimids. It seems that at that time there were no contacts between the Syrian Nizaris and the Yemenite Tayyibis. Both formed a small and closed community living in quite different geographical areas. Finally, as far as I know, the idea of the return of matter to the world soul is not attested in Persian Nizari works of the Alamut and post-Alamut tradition. No traces of it in the Nizari literature, which could, theoretically at least, have influenced the Nizaris of Syria. However, I discovered that the Lub al-Ma'arif, a kind of anthology of esoteric texts compiled by the Tayyibi author Ali ibn al-Walid, who died in 1215, contains a chapter transmitting the words of al-Mu'isfidin Allah precisely on Fana al-Alam. From the short description of the Lub in the Fihrist of al-Majdu, it seems very probable that we are in presence of our text, so I will check this for the publication. But if my supposition is right that Guyard's fourth fragment, or at least a part of it, is identical with the chapter of the Lub al-Ma'arif, it would be the second time that one of Guyard's fragments is found in Tayyibi literature, as David Hollenberg made a similar discovery some years ago. Would this mean that there were more interactions between the Nizari and Tayyibi communities than it looks at first sight? Although it is not impossible, a more plausible explanation has to take into account the fact that Tayyibi authors extensively quote their Fatimid predecessors. After all, it is through their intermediary that the Fatimid literature was transmitted to us. El-Mu'is Fana al-Alam is manifestly a Fatimid text attributed to the Fatimid Caliph. There is nothing specifically Nizari or Tayyibi in it. Transmitted by chance in manuscripts belonging to both communities. If this would be the case, the idea of the sublimation of matter, so characteristic of later Tayyibi Ismailism, would have had antecedents in Fatimid doctrine. So my conclusion, all scholars, very brief, in Ismaili studies agree that Tayyibi literature is a Fundgrube for lost Fatimid material. But this seems also to be the case with the Syrian Nizari literature written in Arabic. Persian Nizari texts, in contrast, represent another tradition, a da'wah jadida, often in complete rupture with Fatimid Ismailism. But although an increasing number of Syrian Nizari texts in Arabic are now available in print, they are still awaiting for some scholarly interest. So we are here in presence of one of the most neglected fields in Ismaili studies today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for stimulating intervention, and sorry for فناء الزمن في هذا المجلس. And now we move to the second speaker, Dr. Rahim Gholami, and he's joining us via Zoom. And his paper is entitled The Semiotics of Nasir-I Khusraw's Ismaili Esoteric Interpretation.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello, everyone, and thanks for attending this session in person and online. Also, many thanks to you, Professor Nader El-Bizri, for chairing today's panel. Please accept my apologies for not being able to attend the panel in person. Naturally, I could speak for hours on the subject, but as I only have 20 minutes, forgive me for not mentioning every point the subject deserves. A salient feature of Nāṣir-I Khusraw's thought is that he is principally a realist philosopher, whose realism is a direct realism that moves directly from the signifier to the signified. This is further evidence in a passage from the Banquet of the Brethren, Khan al-Ikhwan, wherein he engages with his sophist interlocutors to establish the reality of world and thus refutes their argument that things have no reality. This point is of a pivotal significance in Nāṣir-I Khusraw's epistemological approach to the esoteric interpretation of the Quranic signs as manifest realities that guide man towards the Creator and kindle the esoteric senses of the soul. One Ismaili specific aspect of Nāṣir-I Khusraw's realism features in the response of the Ismaili Fatimid Imam Caliph al-Mustansir Billah to Nāṣir-I Khusraw's inquiry regarding the primacy of wisdom, hikmat, over reality, haq. As the Imam explains, hikmat فاضل‌تر است از حق از بهر آنکه حق به حکمت حق است. آنگاه گفت که حق آن است که شبهت را بردارد از مشتبه و حکمت عملی است به علم کرده. Wisdom is epistemologically prior to reality. This is because it is through wisdom that reality is real. He said further, reality is what removes doubt amid ambiguity. Wisdom is an action accomplished through knowledge. This interpretation further corroborates Nāṣir Khusraw's understanding of a tradition of the Prophet. That's to say, لكل حق حقيقة. Every reality has a real purpose. This confirms Nāṣir Khusraw's view regarding the reality of the world and that he is a realist philosopher. It also helps us to understand Nāṣir Khusraw's epistemological position, in which he moves from the apparent signifier to the hidden signifier in his ascending of the ladder of esoteric interpretation. Nāṣir Khusraw further restates the Imam's view that knowledge does give shape to bodies. Further, in Nāṣir Khusraw's view, the realization of substratum matter in a substance is due to it becoming a receptacle of forms. Things we identify as material, corporeal things in this world could have never materialized if it was not for the receptivity of matter to form. Therefore, without the form, the material world would not be able to manifest its matter, and nor would the inevitable pairing of the Zahir and Batin come about. A critical outcome of the above dialectical analysis of matter, hayula, and form, surat, indicates that the reality of the form or Zahir of creation, as the wise act of the Creator, having its source in the divine knowledge, ilm-ilahi, is the manifest proof of the substratum matter or bottom of creation. It follows logically that since both the form and the substratum of the world are substances, they must be substances real. Nāṣir Khusraw observes that everything in nature has some substantial affinity with its creator. For example, the carpenter and the bed, as the artisan and the artifact, both are bodies. But since beyond the substance of the soul, that is the creator of the corporeal world, we know no other substance, there must be an originator for the substance of the soul. The originator, al-Mubdi', is that which Nāṣir Khusraw identifies with the divine command, Amr Bari, or origination, Ibda, that originated the first substance, not from a thing. Moreover, as the origination belongs to the spiritual world of the universal intellect and soul, when Nāṣir Khusraw refers to the first substance, he intends the pure intelligible substance of the soul and intellect. Nāṣir Khusraw emphasizes that beyond this substance, there is neither a path for the imagination, nor any space for language to dwell. The soul, as the hidden inner aspect of human being, accepts the effects of the apparent outer forms, including first and foremost its own body. As the soul gradually acquires consciousness and knowledge of its outward and inward worlds, it itself eventually becomes the source of human acts and artistic creation. The principle of inner causality, that is the inherent agency of form which gives existence to its patient matter, is intertwined with the fabric of the material world and constitutes the building block of the corporeal existence, and indeed is quantum of animation on which minerals, plants, and animals feed to reach their culmination in human beings. And this is pivotal in the study of the direction and purpose of the human soul. The aim of Nasir-I Khusraw's semiotics of the esoteric interpretation, ta'wil, is to make incumbent upon the wise the seeking of their real estate, so that they know whence they have come and whither they are destined. And they think carefully to see with the eye of the heart, that they are on a continuous journey during which there is no respite for them. Nasir-I Khusraw, like Qazi Noman, maintains that an individual's corporeal existence is a necessary coexistence of body and soul, and every corporeal thing we know is composed of matter and form, or shape and content, which in itself is a sign of the uniqueness, wahdat, of the Creator, who is far removed from his creation. That is to say, apart from the Creator, things can only subsist by pairing. Further to highlight the transcending oneness of the Creator, Nasir-I Khusraw quotes the following verse from the Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. ومن كل شيء خلقنا زوجين لعلكم تذكرون. And all things we have created by pairs, that happily you may reflect. One of the things that is intimately close to human beings, that pervades our deepest thoughts, is the faculty of speech. Without speech, man's soul becomes deaf-mute. In fact, the possibility of speech is at the core of the soul's contemplation. The significance of speech lies beyond it being a mere instrument on the periphery that occasionally helps us arrange our thoughts and inner states of mind. Indeed, speech is an inseparable companion of the contemplative soul. It is due to the inherent logic of speech as the main apparatus of language, being a reciprocal motion between language and soul, that man's soul is continuously replenished from within. Without the faculty of speech, self-dialogue, and the soul's consciousness become a bleak void of dreary loneliness. Due to this correspondence of speech and soul, the eternal rise of the signified within the horizon of the signified, one can lose oneself in the voice of this inner language. This inner voice of human language enables human beings to approach the divine in the serenest moments of selflessness. The uplifting power of literature and scripture blossoms in the rapture of this selfless dialogue, making the other one's kith and kin. In the light of the above exposition of meaning as an eternal divine reality that manifests by revelation, Nasir-I Khusraw explains that knowledge, especially that acquired through the ta'wil of the scriptures, constitutes a pivotal role in man's recognition of the unity of the soul's original and final abode. Nasir-I Khusraw's semiotic theory of speech and writing propounds that the search for the real meanings of the corporeally outward signs of creation, perceivable in the horizons of thought, and the hidden meanings of the spiritually inward signs of creation, conceivable within the souls and force, are mutually bound up in the soul's realization of its origin and return. To this end, he also cites the following Quranic verse. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق أولم يكف بربك أنه على كل شيء شهيد. We shall show them our signs in the horizons and in their souls, till it is clear to them that he is the real. Suffices it not as to thy Lord, that he is witness over everything. The hermeneutical relation between the reference and the reference of the verses of Revelation as it is interpreted by the office of the Ismaili Imam of the time. And its function thereof are dubbed here the hermeneutical art of Ta'wil. The hermeneutical art of Ta'wil is an interpretive framework in which the afaq is the mirror of the anfus through which souls see their own reality. Further, the hermeneutical art of Ta'wil stands as the ladder of consciousness. Hence, the more the soul apprehends the horizons of the reference, the higher the limit of the reference, that is, the soul's worlds of meaning would be. Thus, the broader the soul's world of meaning becomes, the higher the rank of the soul would be. Accordingly, as the soul rises to higher ranks of consciousness, and the more it reflects upon the horizons of creation, the closer it becomes to the Creator. Finally, the soul's fulfillment rests upon the realization that the true witness of the afaq in the mirror of the true witness of the anfus, in the mirror of the afaq is not but the one who is witness over everything. أنه على كل شيء شهيد. The purpose of the knowledge of esoteric interpretation is the soul's eventual confession of divine unity and its realization that there is one true reality. That's the beginning and end of the hermeneutical art of Ta'wil. In other words, the dialectic of the outward signs in the horizons and the inward signs in the souls of people both converge on one single reality, as when the Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Inna ilahakum lawahid. Surely your inspirer is one, and brings the good tidings to the patient people and urges them to say, Qalu inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Surely we belong to God, and to Him we return. In Nasir-I Khusraw's view, the creation of the world is the birth of a hermeneutical order whose origin lies in the manifestation of the command of God. The divine meaning communicated thereby is the source of the creation of the world and of man's soul. The soul's final salvation is contingent upon its learning and recognition of this meaning, all the while the soul lives in the corporeal world of matter and form. The Ismaili esoteric interpretation gradually communicates the divine meanings that have been manifested within the world of creation. These meanings have been communicated by the path of the revelation of meaning that is embodied within the conjunction of matter and form. The trajectory of the path of revelation as a descending art till divine meaning of revelation produce their epistemological blossoms in the arena of the garden of the soul. Hence, the fruits of esoteric knowledge awaken the ethereal knowledge visions of the soul to higher spiritual realities of revelation. This is a turning point in the descending trajectory of revelation. For the reception of revelation, where the soul reorients the direction of meaning from the corporeal world of matter and form to the spiritual world of the soul and intellect. This circular epistemological motion of the creation of meaning forms an annular segment whose trajectory reconnects the descent of the soul through the ascent of the esoteric interpretation of revelation, through its abode of origination. Nasir-I Khusraw expounds that the very existence of the substance of the soul is the conceiving of divine knowledge whose beginning is attained by means of the body, while the body is like a ship or a bark, and a means by which the soul disembarks from the state of deteriorating body to the abode of its perfection, that is, its perceiving of things in their true reality by means of divine knowledge. Nasir-I Khusraw further argues that since the manifestation of meaning requires the pairing of matter and form, both speech and writing need the pairing of form and matter to exist as a spoken or written words. Furthermore, he explains that the relation of speech to writing is that of the soul to the body. Just as the speech is the soul of writing, meaning is the soul of speech. Thus, meaning is the closest companion of the soul. And the homogeneity of meaning is the spiritual world of the soul. Nasir-I Khusraw further explains that the speech or rational discourse that is guided by the intellect is the empowering companion of the soul, for it is through the power of speech that people acquire knowledge of the subtle, intelligible things in the world. Nasir-I Khusraw also establishes that a thing is either a corporeal substance or a spiritual substance. He explains that anything that has a definition also has a form. Hence, any form is essentially a definite meaning. Thus, creation is in fact the revelation of meaning in either the subtle substance of the soul or in the dense substance of the matter. Furthermore, the subtle substance of the soul is incorruptible, whereas the material substance is corruptible. For matter is a patient substance and accepts form, whereas soul is an active substance that is the giver of forms. He maintains that once the soul receives higher divine meanings, these meanings remain with the soul eternally. The body, because of its changing states and corruptible nature, cannot preserve spiritual meanings, whereas the spiritual substance of the soul can preserve higher meanings due to the incorruptibility of the substance. Thus, the spiritual substances are nobler than the corporeal substances. Nasir-I Khusraw explains that just as the origination is the beginning of the conceiving of things by the intellect, so is revelation the beginning of spiritual instruction by the prophets. Hence, in the same way as the conceiving of things require intellectual substance, that is the receptacle of intelligible forms, the dispensing of the spiritual teachings is only possible through the sensible forms of speech. In other words, language is necessary for the conveying of knowledge from one person to another. Language encapsulates the essence of knowledge, and hence the esoteric interpretation of language draws the soul nearer to the mercy of God, that is, to the intellect. Nasir-I Khusraw further explains that the meaning of the ta'wil or revelation is specifically finding the relation of the hermeneutically communicated signs of the Creator as the Word of God, with the apparent signs of creation as the act of God. Hence, the task of ta'wil is to establish the origin of the act of God and to take it back to its source, that is, the Word of God. The practice of the esoteric interpretation is essentially the seeking of the Word of God in the person of the speaking Quran, who, as Nasir-I Khusraw explains, is مغرب نور یزدان، خداوند بیان و برهان و دستگیر راهجو و کتاب سخنگوی. The westernmost horizon of the light of God. He who is Lord of the verbal explication and rational demonstration. He who takes the seeker's hand in guidance, being himself the scripture made incarnate in speech. Therefore, in Nasir-I Khusraw's view, the Imam of the time is the repository of the intelligible treasures of the intellect and the fruit of the tree of humanity, in whom the kernel of intellect as a source of eternal spiritual life ought to be sought. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now we move to the third speaker, and this is Professor Antonella Straface, and the title of her paper is On the Understanding of Hajj, a 10th century Ismaili interpretation of pilgrimage.
First of all, good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for your kind invitation and for allowing me to participate online. I apologize, but it was impossible for me to participate in presence to be with you. My paper aims to examine Hajj according to one of the most prominent Ismaili du'at of the middle 10th century, Abu Yaqub al-Sijistani, who devoted the last chapters of the Kitab al-Iftikhar, or the Book of the Boast, to the esoteric meaning of the Arkan al-Islam. The following analysis resumes my previous researches on this topic, in which I have analyzed the Sijistanian interpretation of ablution, prayer, almsgiving, and fasting. The edition I used for my previous works and in the present contribution is Poonawala's edition. Although we have fragmentary information about his life, it appears that the Sijistani was a prominent figure for Ismailism and for the Islamic thought in general. We know that he was an active Da'i in Raya and Khorasan, where he may have been a disciple of An-Nasafi. We also know that, despite his original and likely affiliation with Karmatism, As-Sijistani recognized the Fatimids as the A'imma of the absent Imam. On a more strictly philosophical level, he contributed significantly to the development of Ismaili thought, Islamizing the Neoplatonic component. Nevertheless, his works have not been properly investigated for a long time, partly because they remained inaccessible until recently. Due to time constraints, I only remember that the Book of the Boast, the work in which my paper is based, has been edited twice. In 1980, Mustafa Ghalib published this treatise, which revealed deficiency in accuracy and the deliberate omission of some passages, particularly those related to Wasiyya and Imama. Later, in 2000, Ismail Punawala published the treatise basing on 14 manuscripts, including the one used by Mustafa Ghalib, and supported by a comprehensive introductory commentary and adding a sound critical apparatus. The treatise, divided into 17 chapters, deals with the oneness of God, prophethood, imamate, resurrection, reward and punishment, the ta'wil applied to the revelation, the law, and Islamic rituals. That is the pillars of Islam. The Kitab al-Iftikhar was written with the aim of demonstrating Ismailism's full adherence to the Islamic faith and to the Quran in its inward and outward levels, as al-Sijistani wrote in the introduction. Here, the author explained that the treatise was intended to emphasize, or to boast, as the title of the book, the merits of the Ismailis who were unjustly accused of professing doctrines contrary to Islam. The last chapters of the treatise, devoted to the Arkan al-Islam, would help demonstrate precisely that, in waiting for the advent of the Imam, the Sharia remains in force. This entailed, as al-Sijistani maintained, that the Ismailis recognized the full value of the obligatory duties prescribed by the Sharia, in spite of the common belief of those who condemned the Ismailis as enemies of Islam. However, al-Sijistani said that performing the rites of worship in a formally correct manner was not sufficient, as was believed by most believers who performed them mechanically. That is to say, without knowing their true meaning. According to al-Sijistani, the true believer must be aware of their symbolic value to achieve salvation, because these duties symbolize a truth that no mu'min should ignore. Al-Sijistani devoted the 17th chapter of the Iftikhar, which is the last chapter of the treatise, to the question connected with understanding pilgrimage. في معرفة الحج. Here the author gave the symbolic meaning of pilgrimage starting from its definition. I'm quoting. Pilgrimage is going to visit a house, which is called the house of God, where people gather and make 7 turns around it, starting from the right corner where there is the black stone. End of quotation. Since God cannot be in one place, according to al-Sijistani, this house must be understood as the place of God's knowledge, ma'rifatullah. Al-Sijistani wonders why the opponents of the Ismailis consider this interpretation abominable, because they too do not believe that God can be in one place. Moreover, since home is the place where one feels safe, al-Sijistani concluded that this safe place is the Imam of the time, because he is the repository of God's knowledge and consequently the viaticum for salvation. This involves that going to visit the house of God must be understood as recognizing and obeying the Ai-Imma and the Prophet's cycle. They are 7 as the number of rounds around the stone. I'm quoting. The Prophet was the first to make pilgrimage so that people could follow his example. He then began turning from the right corner to inform the community that the first of the 2 corners was Ismail. Then he placed the stone inside this corner to inform this community that the rank of Asas was hidden in Ismail, like the stone hidden in the corner. As for the number of the 7 turns around the stone, this was a way for the Prophet to inform his community that the number of A'imma in his cycle was 7, and that they are descendant from the Prophet's designated heir, Wasi, that is, who is Ali bin Abi Talib. End of quotation. Regarding the means which are necessary to afford the journey to make pilgrimage, the Quran 3:97 warns, pilgrimage is a duty that men owe to God, to those who can afford the journey. This means that the journey which pilgrimage requires is not within the reach of everyone, but can only be undertaken if one has adequate means, such as livelihood and good health. According to al-Sijistani, true pilgrimage is not within the reach of everyone too, and then requires adequate means, as it aims at the knowledge of the A'imma. Indeed, the knowledge of the A'imma is the most difficult to acquire, the A'imma being the seat and the custody of the divine knowledge, a function which makes them the proper means to walk the main road. This implies that in order to acquire this elevated form of knowledge, one must possess appropriate qualifications. I'm quoting, the word ḥajj is derived from the main road, mahajja. This means that he who is intimate with the light of faith owes to God to aspire to the Imam, to his knowledge, which is the inquiry into the main road, mahajja, that is, the inquiry into the truth. The condition to fulfill this duty is the capability, istita'a, that to advise the community that the knowledge of the A'imma is more difficult than that of the other ranks. Indeed, the A'imma are the intermediaries between creatures and God. They are the abodes of the lights of God's word that extend from the concealment, the ghaiba of the Lord of the Sharia to the advent of the Lord of the Sharia. Consequently, pure acumen, futna safia, and excellent intellect, aql rajih, are required to know them. Is it not true that provisions and the camel were a condition for making pilgrimage? End of quotation. The symbolic significance of pilgrimage also extends to the inviolability of the haram or the sanctuary of Mecca, and to the mawaqit or the main boundary points within whose perimeter the believer achieves the sacred state, thus becoming muhrim. According to al-Sijistani, the haram represents the oath of allegiance. It is worth remembering in this regard that the Ismailis established a hierarchical system of ranks to prepare the community for the advent of the hidden Imam by cautiously spreading Ismaili doctrine. Entry into the Dawah was sanctioned by an oath obliging the neophyte to keep the identity of the Imam and the teachings learned secret. On the other hand, this oath, involving the neophyte's acceptance of a permanent spiritual bond with the Imam of time, would have safeguarded him as material shelter secures man from external dangers. So, the oath with the A'imma, who are the sincere friends of God, represents a security for he who signs it, that is to say, he who obeys them, because by his obedience he will acquire knowledge and wisdom, ilm and hikmah. Once acquired both, the believer will achieve his purpose, which is symbolically represented by the sacred state ihram. Since this state is achieved within the perimeter of the mawaqit, al-Sijistani explains that these points must be understood as the ranks of the Ismaili dawah, through whose mediation the knowledge of the Lord of Time is acquired. There are 5 such ranks, as many as there are boundary points and daily canonical prayer. So, in other words, the knowledge of those ranks is necessary to visit the Imam of the Time, as state of consecration is necessary to visit the Kaaba. Coming now to some conclusive consideration, of course, a provisional conclusion, because my work is a work in progress that needs a service further study. The Sijistani interpretation of pilgrimage is a part of a doctrine deeply rooted in the transcendence of God, in the necessity for the Imam and the Dawah, and in the relationship between the manifest and the occult, Zahir and Batin. The impossibility of defining God in any way led the Sijistani to base Tawheed on the idea of the double negation, which consists in recognizing God as the one who is neither he nor is not he. La huwa huwa wa la huwa la huwa. As he argued in the first chapter of the Iftihar devoted to understanding Tawheed. This being self-God cannot be located in a place, since God is neither in a place nor not in a place. La fi makan wa la fi makan. This involves the impossibility of considering the Kaaba as the house where God dwells. Rather, such a house symbolizes the place where divine wisdom resides, the acquisition of which will fulfill the soteriological purpose to which Ismailism is inspired. Since the place appointed to receive and guard such wisdom is the Imam's presence is necessary because he is the gate to salvation. Likewise, the Dawah is indispensable to achieve this goal, being it concerned with educating Ismaili neophyte in the esoteric doctrine known as hikmah, or wisdom. The figure of the Imam is also connected with a fundamental distinction between the exoteric and the esoteric aspect of the sacred scriptures in their religious prescription and rites. Therefore, al-Sijistani regarding Hajj made a distinction between the exoteric and esoteric pilgrimage, between visiting the material house, the Kaaba in Mecca, and visiting the spiritual house, the Imam. Otherwise, thus, according to al-Sijistani, one who makes the exoteric pilgrimage cannot ignore the true and real meaning of visiting the Kaaba. Otherwise, I'm quoting, he will die as a Jew or a Christian. This implies that visiting the material house, which is destined to corruption and deterioration, must be understood as visiting the spiritual house, which is unchanging, being it the living and pure reality of the Imam, the seat of God's wisdom, the intercessor between God and his creatures, and the house where the believer will be safe and saved. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. And now we open the session for questions and very brief comments. And we have 10 minutes.